The girl was silent, which meant that she had. But when Rosalind held the cup in her hands, looking at it, the Duke of Brighton suddenly said that it was beautiful. The father of the heroine of the story explained his words by saying that he was pleased to see her trying to do something, even though no one had asked for it. The Duke would once again say that it was excellent while the heroine smiled at the compliments. The girl would have continued just smiling if at that moment she hadn't looked at her reflection in the tea, which also turned out to be strange. It had the same color that Eliza's tea had had when she had poured it for the Duke of Brighton. Also at this moment the fairy watched with fear and excitement as Duke Brighton repeatedly drank the same tea that has a strange color and aroma. It seems that the fairy also guesses that there is something wrong with this drink. But what exactly is it? Immediately after that, the fairy flew up to Rosalind and whispered in her ear that she should stop the Duke now and ask him not to drink the tea, as it is very poisonous and bad for his health. Also, the protagonist heard from the fairy that it is not just tea, but Acarosia tea, which does not cure but does not even strengthen the health of the aristocrat. Rosalind thought for a moment. She stared intently at the tea, which had a strange color. On the one hand, the fairy may be telling the truth, but on the other hand, the heroine simply cannot trust her because she is an evil fairy who only wants to bring trouble on her. The fairy kept shouting to the heroine to stop her father because he has already drunk one cup, but Rosalina kept thinking that she can't trust this little creature because it probably only wishes her bad. But what surprised Rosalina even more was that the Duke told her that he was ready to give her the nicest gift, so, according to the Duke, if she wanted something, she could tell it to him. The heroine realized that this is a great chance for her. Taking advantage of the moment, the girl put her hand near the cup with tea and then said, "Mole very much want him to give her this tea." Of course, a father cannot refuse his own daughter in such a request. To explain her intentions to the Duke, Rosalina coughed a little and told her father with a smile that she needed this tea for the reason that recently she has become too bad. But the Duke was no more caught up in the fact that Rosalind wanted the tea than he was in the fact that Rosalind herself had told him of her poor condition. Brighton looked at his daughter in surprise, for this was simply shocking news to him. Frowning heavily, Duke Brighton asked his daughter if she was really feeling bad right now. The aristocrat even sweated with excitement because lately Rosalind means a lot to him. But after his own words, the Duke of Brighton hit himself on the head, upset that he was so shallow. He himself could guess what his daughter had been through and how hard it was for her now. After a while of spending time with her father, Rosalina went to another building near the mansion where she was meeting with the guildmaster for the umpteenth time. And it wasn't the first time Rosalina needed his help. On the table in front of the hero stood a whole jar with the very tea that the Duke drinks, considering it a medicine. It turned out that the girl decided to bring some tea to the guildmaster to find out if it was poisonous or not. The guildmaster held out to the protagonist a sheet of test results, which had a lot of text on it. Artesian said that this was what the lab was able to find out. Putting his hands on the table and joining them, Guildmaster Hennis also told the protagonist that this was not just tea, as she had assumed earlier, but Acarosia poison. This is also what the fairy told Rosaline from the beginning. Acarosia in the Manhwa story is an unusual and very rare ancient plant that is usually well known to experienced doctors and herbalists, but not to ordinary people. After consuming it, there is a feeling that the body is energized, but it poisons the body. But if you consume Acarosia in large quantities mixed with alcohol or tea, it can even lead to heart disease, which eventually leads to the death of the one who consumed it. Rosalina immediately pictured her father, who could have suffered a similar fate. Rosalina continued to read the analysis report carefully, realizing that this was what she had been thinking. And only now she confirmed her guesses, which, in addition, was created for her by the fairy. Even at this moment, the fairy was beside her and indignant, telling Rosalina that she was obligated to believe her. Continuing to look at the test results, Rosalina decided to ask the guild master if there was an antidote for Acarosia. But the first to answer the girl's question was the fairy herself, crossing her arms and shouting to Rosalina that there was no such antidote in the world. But the protagonist was not even going to listen to the little partner. However, to Rosalina's surprise, the masked master also told her that nothing like this exists. The fairy once again forced the heroine only to find out the truth she was telling her in advance. Rosalina was leafing through the additional papers for the analysis report while the wizard approached her and told her that in her case, drinking the Etra potion was enough. The heroine replied that she understood her partner's words, occasionally glancing at the fairy beside her. But the cheek didn't end there. Rosalina did not come to the guildmaster empty-handed, but brought him a gift of various herbs in jars. Rosalina told Artesio that she was giving him all this because she noticed how tired he was at work. The girl also explained that these were not just herbs, but an expensive product that had been brought on ships from across the sea. But the silent Duke still does not understand the lady's real intentions. Leaning on his arm, Guildmaster Henne told the protagonist that he is very grateful to her, but he does not understand why he needs it all in such large quantities. Remembering the way Ansoni had a hard time closing all the jars of herbs in the large closet, Rosalina smilingly told the man not to worry about it because she had an immeasurable amount of them. To finally calm and cheer up the guild leader, Rosalina happily said that she even shared her herbs with Maurice, Artesian's right-hand man. She recalls that the boy was overjoyed at such a gift. Rosalind realized that all this time the fairy had been pretending to help by talking about the Akarotia, but not talking about the healing Zelia from it. But the fairy kept saying she wasn't doing that, and she was trying to warn her. But the fairy kept insisting on her point. She looked at Rosalind with the sweetest eyes so that she would at least look at her and believe a word she said, because before she said there was no such antidote. Noticing that Rosalind still looked at the fairy as if she were her enemy, the little creature was even more upset, having failed in her attempt to reach the heroine's mind. Meanwhile, Duke Artesian continued to stare at the jars of herbs Rosalina had given him. Guildmaster Hennis admitted that he was very grateful, but wasn't sure if his hands would get to it. Suddenly, the masked man rose from his seat, asking Rosalina where she was able to get all these herbs, which, according to her, are brought directly from the sea, which are also very expensive and of high quality. But the protagonist, in response, only loudly put another batch of expensive and useful herbs on the floor, telling the guildmaster that he didn't need to know that. Artesian could only stare at the desserts on the table, sighing sadly and telling the girl that he knew she would avoid answering. But what surprised Artesian even more was that the protagonist suddenly and loudly thanked him for all his services, and then said that she almost forgot to tell him something else. The girl raised her index finger upwards, emphasizing that her words would be very important. As it turned out, Rosalina had one request for the guildmaster. Rosalina said with a smile that in exchange for all of this, she just wanted to get one ticket to the upcoming gladiator fight that would be held in the Empire. The head of the guild could not refuse the protagonist. The very next day, the girl went to a dark and somewhat gloomy place where she bought the ticket and where the fights would be held. The cashier told her that the ticket had been successfully confirmed. The man behind the cash register handed Rosalina a ticket on which was written the name of the show, its time and venue. The girl took it in her hands. Also, when Rosalina was already leaving the cellar and the dark place, adjusting her hood, the man wished her one last time to have a good time. Rosalina made the decision to keep silent and just leave. This dark house is actually a place where fights between different gladiators take place all the time. The house is known for its spectacle and brutality. But despite all the unpredictability of the fights and the intrigue that the show creates, Rosalina knows how everything will end this evening. Even in the eyes of the heroine read joy. The girl knows that tonight will be won by a gladiator slave of unknown nationality and age. Rosalina knows that he has blue long hair and the same blue eyes. But the girl didn't have time to think anymore. She decided to enter the hall, where a huge giant was already fighting some brave gladiator, throwing him to the ground. After the fifth victory, the blue giant shouted with all his might, and the host of the show announced to the audience that the fifth gladiator in a row could not defeat this monster. The audience at this time shouted from their seats, adding more intrigue to the show, but unlike them, Rosalina was quieter. She sat quietly in her seat, keeping her hood up so she wouldn't be recognized. The host of the fight stood in the middle of the arena, shouting to the audience that after 5 fights the giant was even unharmed, and he did not know that he dared to defeat such a strong opponent. Meanwhile, behind the announcer's back, a cage slowly opened, releasing the next contestant, while the announcer himself solemnly announced his arrival to the audience. A foot stepped into the arena, which was shackled by a thick iron alloy. At that moment, the announcer told the audience to meet the new face of their unrivaled show. The gladiator slave that Rosalina had thought of earlier stood in the middle of the arena, while the show organizer loudly told the audience that his name was Callie Strike. Noticing the fact that the gladiator had a not too amazing body shape, some of the spectators immediately started laughing, saying that he wouldn't be able to withstand even one punch from a healthy giant. On the other side of the arena, the spectators were also laughing with Kaylee, not understanding how an ordinary slave could be allowed into the arena after all. He's just an ordinary weakling. But while the spectators were laughing, the speaker also said that to brighten up this duel, they had prepared a very unusual gift for everyone, which was held by a subordinate on a blue pillow. The speaker of the show proclaimed that the stone on the pillow is a fragment of healing. It must be a very important and precious thing if played out on the show. Rosalind looked at the stone as if it was what she was going to the show for. Her eyes sparkled with a new glare because it's an important thing to her too. But the gemstone was wanted by other audience members as well. Two men began to whisper earnestly among themselves, saying that this was the one stone that could save even a mortal wound. While Kaylee was on his feet and getting ready, the announcer announced to the audience that there were 5 gladiators left today, including Kaylee. But which gladiator on the count would be able to defeat the giant was a big intrigue. So the presenter also invited the audience to place a bet to find out who guessed and give him the prize of the evening, a fragment of healing. After the host's words, a girl approached Rosalina, asking the heroine if she wanted to make a bet. The girl was already reaching out her hand to the sheet to write it down, but she still kept her eyes on Kaylee. The other spectators were already whispering about a certain fighter with the nickname of Bull, asking each other if he was still in the ring. Remembering how strong and invincible Bull was, the men kept talking about him, saying that he was the real star of the show. Rosalina was already writing down her bet while the announcer was repeating that the point of the bet was to guess which one Cole would come out to fight. After writing everything down, Rosalina gave the sheets to the Jensine while she thanked her for the girl agreeing to participate in the intriguing game. Kaylee was also given a sword in her hand, after which the announcer said mole, no more delay, so he ordered everyone to start the fight immediately. Right after the start, Kaylee leaned on his foot to rush towards the giant who has no idea what is going to happen to him. Holding his sword in one hand, Kaylee ran at his opponent with such force that many gladiators could only envy him. Kaylee seems to be more confident in his strength than the spectators. At the same time, the determined slave and gladiator simultaneously kept his eyes on the giant as if he was now his prey. The host also watched as Kaylee fearlessly ran towards the huge beast, creating even more intrigue for the audience with the question of who would win the fight. The giant decided to strike first. He wanted to hit Callie with his strong fist, but the slave of unknown nationality deftly dodged, continuing to run. Rosalina noticed it perfectly. She even adjusted her hood to get a better look at the blue-haired fighter, for he was very fast indeed. Also, the speed of the fighter was surprised by the other spectators who were sitting next to the main character. Rosalina was even more surprised by the fact that Callie quickly and skillfully climbed on the giant, leaning only one foot on his big knee. Callie himself was already preparing his long sword to deliver a great blow to the invincible giant. The huge beast did not have time to follow the blue-haired fighter. He was also surprised by his agility, but he did not want to lose to him. The giant was not going to give up. He waved his hand in the direction of the fighter, but this time Kaylee managed to deftly dodge, so the giant didn't know what to do next. The giant had gotten a real tough nut to crack. This made Kaylee's rival angry. He grumbled unhappily in the arena, not understanding why he was being beaten by someone who didn't look like he had any hopes. The giant kept his eyes on Kaylee, hoping to kill him with a single sweep of his arm. But it took Kaylee only a split second to leap directly above the giant and swing his sword at his head. All of the blue-haired fighter's actions are so polished and perfect that anyone can see it. A moment later, Kaylee struck the giant with a blow that proved to be decisive in ending the fight. At that moment, Kaylee's blue eyes lit up as if he were a true predator among humans. With only one swing of his sword, the giant immediately fell to the ground as the strength left his body. Kaylee was only one strike enough to duck the hopes of the spectators that he was talentless and weak. The giant fell to the ground finally, creating a loud rumble. Kaylee only had to watch as her opponent lay on the floor, not even making a scratch on his body or scaring him to death. The onlookers who had previously condemned Kali and called him the ultimate lowlife were now watching him with their mouths open. They realized that in just one moment they had lost all the money they had bet on the Giants' victory. The announcer solemnly announced that the outcome of the match was clear and complete because Kaylee was the winner of the fight. The winner himself continued to stare at the giant's body, which was no longer showing signs of life. The blue-haired fighter wanted to leave the battlefield, but at the very last moment he decided to raise his head and look at a spectator who interested him. This very spectator turned out to be Rosalina. The protagonist also could not help but notice the gaze of the winner on herself. She was surprised, slightly removing the hood from her head to get a better look at the mysterious man. After Kaylee's unforgettable fight with the giant, the girl was already on her way home, covering her face with her cape so that no one would look at her, much less recognize her. Rosalina couldn't forget the fact that Kaylee was definitely looking at her. The intrusive thoughts even made Rosalina stop, not understanding why Callie had chosen to look at her specifically and what his suspicious glance in her direction meant. However, the girl also tried to calm herself down while sweat from excitement ran down her face. Rosalina pondered the fact that this simply couldn't be happening. On the grounds of this, Rosalina decided to remember who Callie really is. His real name is Calix Blake, and he is the sole heir to the Blake family who disappeared a very long time ago. Also, Rosalina remembered that, according to the story of the novel, at one point the main character, Daisy, comes to him and saves him from gladiatorial combat, even giving him happiness. And in fact, that is where the novel begins. It begins with the events in the house for gladiatorial fights, after which everything begins to happen gradually. The heroine understands this perfectly well. The girl continued walking down the dark street, thinking about the fact that when the story had not yet begun, she thought that it would be best not to come to the gladiatorial fights. Rosalina also realizes the fact that if she does even one thing wrong, Daisy's meeting with Kaylee may never happen like in the original story of the novel. The girl's hand reaches into her secret pocket to pull out what Rosalina has been wishing for lately. The heroine of the story realizes that she just couldn't help but get the thing. In Rosalina's hand was a beautiful stone that magically shimmered with different colors. The heroine is already imagining how she will use the healing properties of this stone for her own purposes. But from admiring the graceful object, the girl was interrupted by a fairy, who flew closer to Rosalina and, pulling on her hood, asked to listen to her at least now. But what was noticeable to the fairy was that she was a little wary. The fairy had warned Rosalind that strange people had been following her for a long time. Behind the girl's back, there were indeed 3 unknown people who were staring intently at the heroine. The 3 suspicious guys continued behind the lonely Rosalina even when the heroine quickened her pace. At first, she wondered each equal sign them exactly.